Welcome to Have Your Say. I'm Mike Wooldridge. Today our subject is religion and the existence of God. Did God create man, or did man create God? Is religion a source of good in the world or of evil? Without religion, how could we define these terms? Our guest is Professor Richard Dawkins, who's an atheist and the author of the book The God Delusion. Call or email him your questions. What do you believe? Here's how to get in touch.
You can phone Have Your Say on 442087495353 or email us. The address is haveyoursay@bbc.co.uk. You can also send an SMS text message to 447736100100. All of those details and information on other ways to get in touch are on our website, bbcnews.com/haveyoursay.
Professor Dawkins is the holder of the Charles Simoni Chair of Public Understanding of Science at Oxford University. He's written many books, including The God Delusion, in which he makes the case that a belief in God is not just irrational, but potentially deadly. Welcome to the programme, but before we come to you, here's a sample of some of the comments on our website. Felix Alvarez from Gibraltar says, "Isn't the atheist mantra, 'Science doesn't have all the answers yet,' the same as the religious mantra, 'God exists'? Neither has or can prove their positions and continue to rely on faith." Penny in the United States says, "God's work feeds the poor, helps those in need after disaster, builds schools, opens hospitals. Doing God's work in his way means leave your own stuff behind. It's not necessary. Please look at the whole package." Richard Dawkins, first you were born in Kenya, and then you went to live for a few years anyway in what was Nyasaland, now Malawi. Loosely, at least, you had an Anglican upbringing. How did you get from there to where you stand on religion today?
At the age of about 9, I realized that there was more than one religion and that people all over the world think different things, and it was an accident that I happened to be being brought up Anglican. I realized that if I'd been brought up in a Muslim country, I'd be Muslim. If I'd been brought up in a Hindu country, I'd be Hindu. And so it seemed to be a pure accident that I was Christian, as I thought.
But it's a long way from that to becoming an atheist.
Well, it's at least, it sowed the seeds of doubt. And then I then went back to being Christian. I was confirmed at the age of about 13, and continued to be a Christian till I was about 15, the main argument being the argument from design. The world's such a beautiful, elegant place, it looks designed. So it was then that I finally discovered Darwinism that finally made me an atheist.
Let's be clear about your position on the existence or otherwise of God. You say in The God Delusion that God, though not technically disprovable, is very, very improbable indeed. Can you explain in a couple of sentences how you have reached that conclusion then, and what exactly it means?
There's an awful lot of things you can't disprove. You can't disprove fairies, you can't disprove flying teapots and unicorns. I believe in God to exactly the same extent as I believe in fairies and unicorns. I can't disprove any of them, but there's no reason positively to believe in any of them.
And the book, The God Delusion, how many copies has that now sold? It's always called a runaway bestseller.
Just over 1.5 million copies in English alone.
And in how many languages has it been published?
31 languages.
And what you read into those, that level of sales?
I think that the time has come for the world to have a bit of a rethink, because mine's not the only book on the same theme that's selling very well.
Right, well, let's go to our first caller then. Professor Dick Joyce from Switzerland. Do you have a question that you want to put to Professor Richard Dawkins?
Yes. The first question I was going to ask was why he calls himself an atheist when it's clear from his own work that he's actually an agnostic. But I think it's merely a question of semantics, and I don't want to pursue that. What I would like to say is that I agree entirely with the position that he's taken in regard to this subject. But what disappoints me about his book and his views is how unscientifically they're presented. I have the old-fashioned view that P probability estimates never equals 0 or 1, and therefore the right way to tackle this question is to do a proper scientific inquiry, the methodology for which exists or can be developed, to see whether in fact belief in some other entity, let's call it God or what you will, actually does more harm than it does good. I think all that Professor Dawkins managed to say is that it does do more harm, and I'm not convinced that he's proved it, although I believe he's right.
Right, let's just get Professor Dawkins' response to that in essence, you're not being scientific.
There's a confusion there between probability of the existence of God and probability that that religion does harm. I fully accept that the probability is not either 0 or 1, but somewhere in between, and I think the probability of God's existence is, as you've quoted me as saying, very, very low, so 1% or something, or less than 1%. And I discussed
Let me just interrupt. Doesn't that make you an agnostic?
Yes, it does.
Technically, then, rather than an atheist.
Of course it does, but we are all agnostic about fairies. That was the point I was wanting to make before. We are technically agnostic about fairies because you cannot say the probability of fairies is 0. You can say that it's very low, and that's what I feel about the existence of God. But Professor Joyce suddenly switched at the end of his question from probability of the existence of God to probability that religion does harm. And that's an entirely different question, and it's not one that I would like to put a probability figure on. It's a question it's a question that interests me less than the question of the purely scientific question of the existence of God.
Professor Joyce?
Well, there I do very markedly disagree with Professor Dawkins. I think this is the practical question, and that's the question that we really need to answer, and I believe it can be answered, or an approach to its answering can be made.
Well, I'm interested to hear that, and I would like to hear how Professor Joyce would put a number on the probability that religion has a net evil effect. Is that what you're saying, sir?
Yes, I'm saying that I think the methodology does exist, or can be developed from existing methodologies, to give a useful, practical, usable answer to this question, which to my mind is the important one to try and answer.
Well, I mean, that's extremely interesting, but it is a different question,
yes,
and it's perfectly possible that the existence of God has a probability near 0, and the probability that religion does good could be quite high, but it still doesn't mean that God exists.
Let me just interrupt you both there, if I may, to read this email we've had from Jenny in the United Kingdom. You wouldn't say the Ferrari F1 car evolved from an explosion in a junkyard, so isn't it ludicrous to say that the human eye or the reproductive system just evolved by random chance and mutation?
It is certainly ludicrous to say that the eye evolved by random chance and mutation, and that's precisely what Darwinians do not say. We say that it evolved by natural selection, which is not random, and it is not ludicrous. It is a highly elegant theory which works and which is the only theory that has ever been proposed, the only workable theory that's ever been proposed to account for the existence of complex things like eyes. Ferrari cars we account for by design because there are humans to design them, and that pushes back the question, where did the humans come from? And the answer to that is evolution by natural selection.
Professor Joyce, just a brief last word from you.
Well, let me just emphasize again that for me, perhaps not for Professor Dawkins, the important question is the one that I voiced. I couldn't care less about agnosticism versus atheism as a question.